The 85th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Kiko Pangilinan will lead the chamber in prayer.
This prayer is taken from the book of Psalms, Psalm 112. Praise the Lord. Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commands. Their children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever. Even in darkness, light dawns for the upright, for those who are gracious and compassionate and righteous. God will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Their hearts are secure. They will have no fear. In the end, they will look in triumph on their foes. They have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Their horn will be lifted high in honor. The wicked will see and be vexed. They will gnash their teeth and waste away. The longings of the wicked will come to nothing. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
The Secretary may please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, De Leon, Ejercito, Escudero, Getzalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 15 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 84th session, May 22, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge some guests in the Senate. We would like to welcome the delegation from the Parliamentary Institute of Cambodia, headed by Dr. Dareth Pat, and also the visitors of Senator Mig Subiri and Senator Nancy Binay, Mayor Bay Rachel Ampatuan of Datu Unsay, Maguindanao. Also the visitors of Senator Legarda, Vice Governor of Tarlac, Vice Governor Sada David, Board Member Vernon Villanueva, Saturnino Mandal, Carlos Sawit, Rames Sembrano, Tony Boy Cervantes, and Henry De Leon. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to the Senate.
I move with, that we proceed with the reference of business, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved. The Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. 1467, an act establishing a Securities and Exchange Commission office in Coronadal City and appropriating funds. Therefore, Senator Manuel Manny Pacquiao.
Refer to the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies and Finance.
Resolutions. Number 384, resolution commending and congratulating the Philippine national men's basketball team, Gilas Pilipinas, for clinching the gold medal in the 2017 SIBA Men's Championship. Senator Sani Angara.
Refer to the Committee on Rules.
385, resolution commending and congratulating Milan Milindo for winning the International Boxing Federation Junior Flyweight title against Akira Yaigashi at the Ariake Coliseum in Tokyo, Japan. Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao.
Refer to the Committee on Rules.
Committee report number 104 prepared and submitted by the Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship on Senate Bill number 1466, with Senator Subiri as author thereof, entitled An Act Prohibiting the Imposition of Expiry Dates on Gift Checks, Certificates, or Cards by Issuers and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 1340, Senator Severi.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of public interest, I move to recognize Senator Loren Legarda.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized.
Kahapon ikaw eh. Thank you, Mr. President. I deliver this privileged speech as we celebrate the International Day for Biodiversity, and there's an ongoing Biodiversity Congress in Metro Manila this week. Our biodiversity and the ecosystems that it helps function are essential to all forms of life on Earth. The Philippines is very fortunate to be the center of biodiversity, one of the mega diverse countries, as proven in various expeditions where scientists and researchers have been able to discover new and endemic species in the country. In 2015, Terry Gossliner of the California Academy of Sciences led an expedition on the Verde Island Passage and discovered more than 100 species that are likely new to science. Gossliner said, and I quote, "The Philippines is jam-packed with diverse and threatened species. It's one of the most astounding regions of biodiversity on Earth." Following an expedition in the mountains of northeast Mindanao just last year, Rafe Brown of the University of Kansas Biodiversity Institute said, and I quote, "The terrestrial diversity of the Philippines is amazing, and this part of Mindanao is a center of that diversity." Brown's team discovered a total of 126 species, including 40 frogs, 49 lizards, 35 snakes, a freshwater turtle, and a crocodile. We have an abundance of natural resources, but all this wealth is at great risk. Development activities, land degradation, overgrazing, deforestation, pollution, overfishing, hunting, land use change, the overuse of fresh water have pushed ecosystems to the limit. Our country has become one of the world's top biodiversity hotspots with a large number of species threatened with extinction. Biodiversity is the web of life, but the development around us has caused many to think we can live on our own and actually disconnect from this web, forgetting that biodiversity feeds and heals, provides us air and water, and is a source of livelihood and creation. Further endangering the precarious situation of our country's biodiversity is the challenge of climate change. Among the projected impacts of climate change is a loss of thousands of species, along with significant changes in the natural ecosystem. The rise in average global temperature will render many species unable to adapt quickly to these new conditions or to move to regions more suitable for their survival. A 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius increase in global mean temperature in the next 50 to 100 years would render 30% of species at risk of extinction, according to the IPCC. We actually have numerous laws already that define the policies and programs to promote environmental protection, and some of these laws date back to the 1970s. But 40 years hence, our environment seems to be in no better state. And I don't have to list all of those laws. They're there in our PowerPoint. Paradoxically, many of life's comforts happen all at the expense of sustainability. But nature has a way of reminding man of the repercussions of the savage abuse of the natural environment. The Philippines has been issued its fair share of warnings through numerous disasters. Long ago, in Payatas in year 2000, the trash slide. In 2004, the mudslide in Quezon. I believe that was in Real and Infanta. And in many devastating typhoons like Ondoy 2009, Pablo, Sendong, Yolanda, and many more. And just recently in Cagayan de Oro, when there was not even a typhoon, just because they did not segregate waste at source, recycle, and compost. Today, disasters loom worldwide with accelerated global warming. People need to understand that there is a price to comfort, safety, and convenience. In the global effort to address environmental issues, numerous international instruments have been adopted, like the United Nations Framework, Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and the more recent Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which this whole chamber concurred in. These international agreements are helpful, but they cannot guarantee results by themselves. Only people can deliver their outcomes. Leaders and community members give life to these policies. Like, for example, the Purok system in San Francisco in Camotes Island, and residents have exercised their vigilance in implementing the ESWM and to participate in the rehabilitation of their own watersheds. And something very close to home is my own barangay in Potrero in Malabon, where I was born, which used to be notorious for having not only informal settlers but open dumps. But what would we do? It has been transformed into a model barangay which won the Clean and Green Award of the MMDA by doing strictly door-to-door, no segregation, no collection policies. And a team monitors the implementation while the eco aides make rounds using push carts instead of garbage trucks to ensure proper segregation. So we're able to prove that a barangay with informal settlers that is not belonging to an affluent community can actually be an exemplary barangay for solid waste management. In the private sector, for example, the Cravings Group, a well-known chain of restaurants, they promote a zero-waste lifestyle. The core of their program is complying with the 5 E's of ESWM: engineering, education, enforcement, entrepreneurship, and eco-valuation. They run their own MRF and have reached at least 95% diversion from the dump site. And I hope that the Senate admin officers are listening so that our own institution, the Philippine Senate, would implement the MRF correctly, which I think is being implemented well, but of course there's always room for improvement. On the tourism front, the El Nido Resorts in Palawan promotes environmental stewardship through its environmental code called the 10 El Nidos, reminding guests about environmentally sensitive protected areas and the appropriate behavior to ensure conservation. These examples, whether in tourism, in the private sector, in local institutions, show that communities, the private sector, all of us can be part of efforts to promote resilience and sustainability. We don't need to go into the depths of our forests and dive into the oceans to protect our biodiversity. We only need to adopt a lifestyle that would not harm other living things that we share the earth with. Now, in terms of legislation, we have more than enough legislation, and I congratulate Senator Villar for having passed yesterday the eNIPAS Act, which I authored and many of us here have co-authored as well. And I hope this will be passed by Congress soon, because out of 240 protected areas, 113 have been proclaimed. Only 13, Mr. President, has been legislated. In how many? In the post-EDSA Congress. So 100 will be covered by the expanded National Integrated Protected Areas System. I've also filed a resolution urging the Senate to lead the conduct of an environmental audit of relevant government agencies and LGUs in relation to their compliance to and their enforcement of environmental laws. And I'm glad that our legislators, local legislators of the province of Tarlac are present here today, so that Vice Governor David and his board members can strictly implement all the environmental laws that we've named in our PowerPoint today. Our goal is to introduce measurable targets, identify where implementation can be supported, and to encourage public accountability of all officials. And so I can go on and on. It's very difficult to talk when there are so many hearings going on while I am speaking. But, Mr. President, all I want to say is that it's hard to convince people to protect our environment. I am sure if we were talking about something so controversial on pork barrel funds or scandals or corruption, etc., everybody, you could actually hear a pin drop. When I speak about climate change and protected areas, our colleagues would rather have their own meetings, but I can see always Senator Ontiveros intently listening to me all the time. Yes, okay, so now I've got the attention of everybody. So, as elected leaders of the nation, we are tasked to guide our people in renewing their commitment as stewards of the earth. I can see you smiling. We are confronted with the task of protecting our country's unique and at the same time endangered biodiversity, pursuing a kind of development that has genuine regard for the state of our natural wealth. It has never become more crucial than today, especially with a world power like the United States, which has the hopefully remote, but it's no longer remote possibility of withdrawing from a very important climate agreement. Having said that, Mr. President, on the day of biodiversity, on the week where a biodiversity congress is happening in Metro Manila, I would just like to share a very short anecdote where I saw some very committed, passionate individuals today. A lady came to me who was in her 60s, and she told me that her job was to walk 6 hours to a lake, Dagatan Lake in Tayabas, Quezon, where her job is to monitor the birds. She watches the birds and counts the birds that come every day early in the morning, because Dagatan Lake is a protected area, not by legislation, but protected by itself. She walks 6 hours. It's a beautiful lake. I wish I had put it there. I see Senator Soto thinking there's something funny with what I'm saying. No, she is not crazy. She is a devoted, passionate individual who counts the number of birds that are flying and documents ang huni ng ibon. That's the job I want to do after 2019. It's not funny, Senator Soto, but your laughter makes me laugh. But really, the passion of this lady in her 60s to tell me that she walks through 6 hours of forest lands with no roads, and to be a biodiversity monitor team of a NGO of 6 barangays called Liksi, that's community-based and counting the birds, which is dwindling in number because of climate change. That's commitment, Mr. President. They are not paid. Kusa nila ginagawa because they want a legacy to be left behind for the next generation. With that, I caught the attention of our colleagues at the tail end of my speech. So what you will remember are not the statistics I said here, but the lady who crosses 6 hours and counts the birds in Dagatan Lake in Tayabas, Quezon. Thank you. Let us all be faithful to our duty to be stewards of the earth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Mig Subiri, Mr. President, wishes to be recognized.
Senator Subiri is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to congratulate Senator Lauren Legarda for her unextinguishable passion for the environment. Unextinguishable. Cannot be extinguished, no matter what. But I'd like to also, a bit of good news since she was talking about counting of birds. Just recently, a few days ago, as a matter of fact, a colleague of mine from the Philippine Kakadu Conservation Project in Nara, Palawan, in Rasa Island, won the Whitley Award. That is the Green Oscars for Environment. And she's no other than Indira Lacerna Widman. She's a Filipina married to a German. And they've been counting birds in this small island called Rasa in Nara, Palawan.
Yes, Rasa.
And we started, and then I have a personal connect with this because on my personal capacity, I assist, Mr. President, this foundation. And they started 12 years ago on that island with 20 cockatoos, Philippine red-vented cockatoos. These are critically endangered, one of the rarest cockatoos in the world. Your Honor, Mr. President, out of our efforts and her effort to be able to do conservation project in that area, counting the birds and hiring the poachers. From poaching, they became the forest guards. Now we have an overcapacity of 400 birds in that island. We've actually translocated parrots to El Nido and other areas of Palawan. It's a success story.
I'm so happy you share that.
Yes,
I wish
Madam,
I could meet, Mr.
for Lady
President,
Senator.
I can feel the passion of Senator Subiri. I'm glad that you mentioned about the Green Oscars winner who
Yes.
counted birds in Rasa
Yes.
Sanctuary. For those who keep on laughing and giggling in this chamber, that's called biological monitoring.
Yes,
The
biodiversity
minority
conservation.
leader and the majority leader may not know that there is such a job or a task called biological diversity monitoring. Senator Gordon, Senator Soto, and Senator Drilon. Yes. You keep on giggling.
Well, to end my manifestation and my congratulations to the lady senator, I'm hoping that next Wednesday I can bring her here. No other than Her Royal Highness Princess Anne of England, of the Great Britain, presented the award to her, and I'll be. No, I'm bringing Indira, our compatriot, here, hopefully on Wednesday, so that the chamber can recognize her efforts in biodiversity conservation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and thank you to our lady senator for her passion for the environment. It's so contagious. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know that Senator Angara recently passed into law with our support the Green Jobs Act. The biological diversity monitoring is part of the Green Jobs. Cleaning our esteros and canal is part of the Green Jobs. Creating community food gardens is part of the Green Jobs. That's part of what TESDA has been teaching. But really, the 1 million jobs in environment, in agriculture, can easily be attained. Let's just be creative in doing that, and it can be community-based. Who will pay? The community can pay, and you'd be surprised that even if they're not paid, and these are the projects that are actually funded by USAID, by GIZ, by various organizations both here and abroad. With that, I thank you, unless there's someone else who would like to share their passion on bird watching and other matters.
Thank you very much to the
Yes,
future lady bird watcher.
we were just surprised,
Majority Leader.
we were just surprised that they were talking about birds. And I'm glad that Senator Dick Gordon did not stand up to join the discussion. Mr. President, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator Loren Legarda to the Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and the Committee on Local Government because of the issues on LGUs.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1391 under Committee Report Number 53.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, Senator Hontiveros and Senator Ejercito have already started with the sponsorship of Senate Bill 1391, or the measure mandatory PhilHealth coverage for PWDs. However, the President Pro Tem has made the reservation to deliver a co-sponsorship speech today.
At this juncture, Mr. President, let me, Majority Leader, I will just submit my co-sponsorship for the record
Okay.
on Senate Bill 1391.
All right. So, Mr. President, I move that the co-sponsorship speech of the President Pro Tem be inserted into the records.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1391.
Is
for
there any
the Senate to
objection?
study.
There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, we'd like to also acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Dr. Gordon Crick of Germany.
Welcome to the Senate.
Welcome to the Senate, yes. Now, Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report Number 103.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, yesterday, Senators Villar and Zubiri We have already started with the sponsorship of Senate Bill 1465, or the measure on the free irrigation service to small farmers. However, Senator Legarda, Senator Airstone, and Senator Recto likewise made reservations to deliver a co-sponsorship today. And also Senator Dick Gordon. Ano, co-sponsorship ka? Hindi na, submit na lang. I moved that we insert into the records the co-sponsorship speech of Senator Loren Legarda.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Si Dick din eh. Oh, hindi. Babasahin nila. Oo. Senator Ejercito likewise to insert into the records, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Nag-ano na siya, nag-insert na siya.
Majority Leader,
Yes.
may I ask for a minute suspension?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Move to suspend. Baliktad ah. Insert ka rin. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
So, Mr. President, for Senate Bill 1465, I move to recognize the Senate President Pro Temp, Senator Ralph Recto, to deliver his co-sponsorship speech on the free irrigation service to small farmers.
The Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Ralph Recto, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. If the middle class patriotism is soluble in taxes, the one of farmers can also dissolve in irrigation fees. For years, farmers have been clamoring for a moratorium on irrigation payments. Basically, what they seek is parity, to be treated the same way that conglomerates have been showered with tax incentives by government. Indeed, if many projects by those who have made it to the Forbes billionaires list are kept afloat by fiscal freebies, then why can't they, who are having a hard time making it to the next meal, receive free water? Irrigation fees paid by those who till the land may be a small drop in the bucket for those whom they feed. The growing rate is 2 kavans of rice per hectare during the wet season and 3 kavans during the dry months. 1 year's worth of cafe latte money for those who want to avail of free Wi-Fi. But for those who work the land in never-ending penury, those 3 kavans could spell the difference between famine or feast. For those bowed by the weight of back-breaking, maraming kahig, walang tuka labor, 3 kavans could mean that their children will go to bed on a full stomach instead of going to school on an empty one. So if we are giving tax breaks to the idle rich, Mr. President, on the belief that money retained in their pockets are better spent by them than by the government, the same benefit should also be extended to the working poor. Making irrigation water-free is a kind of tax break for farmers, but of the liquid kind. True, it may not make all of them financially liquid overnight. It will not get them rich, but it will help them get by. Mr. President, as we are on the cusp of granting tax breaks to the salaried, professionals, and businessmen, I think it would be wise to compare the exemptions sought to be given to compensation earners against the cost this bill would entail. Perhaps showing the comparative scale of generosity would tilt those who have reservations on this bill to its side. The projected income foregone from lower personal income tax rates is at least 180 billion a year. This bill, on the other hand, would waive 1.5 billion in annual irrigation fees, the amount the National Irrigation Administration collected last fiscal year. The disparity is not on the income forfeited alone. In fact, it grows bigger on the number of beneficiaries. 7 million compensation earners to 8.9 million farmers and farm laborers. In short, we will be helping many with less. In terms of what aid to give to our farmers, free irrigation is the low-hanging fruit. We don't have the money to cover every square meter of land with fertilizer or build solar dryers on a fraction of them. We don't have enough money to wipe out the deficit in paved farm-to-market roads. In fact, if we sustain current annual spending of 6 billion pesos on FMRs, it will take us at least 30 years to turn all rural roads from dirt to concrete. The same is true with post-harvest facilities and other farm machinery. We're light years away from making mechanical combines a fixture of the rural scenery. Post-harvest wastage remains a stubborn enemy. The volume of palay lost to poor handling in a year is enough to sate the only rice craving of 17.1 million Filipinos. But irrigation water, it is something that is already there, seeping through furrows in many farms, lapping onto the yards of farmers. It is something which has already been delivered. The only thing left is to waive the bill. And how much are we writing off? 1.5 billion pesos a year. Well, some will see this as an unrecoverable expense. I see it, however, as a recoupable investment with a high yield. It is an anti-poverty tool. Agriculture absorbs 27% of jobs and is home to 40% of the poor. What better way to fight raging poverty in the countryside than by dousing it with water? Hopefully, with other farm initiatives, it will lead to more affordable food. This is important because food eats up 60% of the budget of the bottom 30% of families. The sector called the GNP, or the gutom na Pilipino, is on the rise. Kaya nga ang gusto ng tao ay makatikim ng murang pagkain. At hindi lang extrajudicial killing, kundi extra rice at extra ulam. As to the amount forgone, it is small compared to other expenses with fewer benefits the government is splurging on. Compare the 1.5 billion to the 6.7 billion in intelligence funds, or the 17.9 billion in travel expenses of bureaucrats this year. It is 1.5% of the 102 billion we allocated this year in pension for retired soldiers and policemen. Gusto pa ninyo ng isang halimbawa? The central bank has requested 150 billion in additional capitalization, a request Congress may likely accede to. Anong ibig sabihin nito? That banks are too big to fail, but irrigation is too big to fund. But this is not to say, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, that this bill is the cure-all to what ails the farm sector. It only forms part of the cocktail of solutions, one of which is to end the perpetual El Nino in farm appropriations. The other is to balance our urban-centric development view with rural imperatives. If we are raring to build a Metro Manila subway worth gazillions of pesos, then we should also apply the same bold thinking in bringing billions of gallons of water to our farms through more waterways. Hindi naman po ito mahirap. Ang annual rainfall sa atin ay 7 feet 7 inches. Lampas tao. Sa Australia, 21 inches o hanggang binti. Sa Bahrain, isang bansot na 3.8 inches o hanggang sakong. Despite 2 dozen typhoons dumping water that transforms large swaths of our land into a water world, including Manila roads into rapids, we are lagging behind in storing this water for the dry months. Rain is a matter of God's grace. Storing it is a matter of good governance. Unfortunately, we're failing on the latter. At present, of the 3 million hectares of irrigable land, only 1.7 million are irrigated, leaving a backlog of 1.3 million hectares. That is, however, on paper. But on reality, many irrigation systems are in need of repair. The following data underscore the urgency of rehabilitation and expansion. Only about 568,000 hectares administered by the NIA under its National Irrigation Program were reached by water in 2015, below the 836,000 hectares in its reported service inventory. Water also reached just 362,000 hectares covered by many community irrigation systems, which on record claim to service 638,000 hectares. Sadly, funds to expand the service area remain a drop in the bucket of what is needed. For 2017, for example, we have budgeted 38.4 billion to bring water to 29,000 hectares of unirrigated farmland and to restore 18,000 hectares presently served by the NIA, among others. At the rate we are appropriating, which is compounded by the slow utilization of funds, it will take us 45 years, almost half a century, to wipe out the deficit. Clearly, we are bringing water to farms at a glacial pace. It should instead flow like a river and be an ever-flowing stream, to borrow a line from the good book. Such a biblical reference is apt because providing water to farmers is truly a matter of justice, not just to farmers but to Filipinos yet to be born. We can't future-proof our country through a drip-drip of funds to irrigation and agriculture. Irrigation doubles farm yield. That's neither fake news or alternative fact. We can only coax 6 tons of rice out of 1 hectare of unirrigated land. With irrigation, production rises to 8.6 tons on account of 2 to 3 harvests a year. So as water supply increases, food imports recede and malnutrition retreats. Lampas 300 bilyon po ang ating food import bill, yung deklarado, hindi kasama ang smuggled tulad ng pinuslit na bawang. Irrigation is an unstoppable, unpostponable exercise because water is a non-substitutable input in growing food. Through hydroponics, plants can grow without soil. They can live in greenhouses bathed with artificial light, but they can't survive without water. Thus, the old age mantra, without water, there is no agriculture. Without agriculture, there is no food. Without food, there is no life. So basically, Mr. President, this bill is about life, which is why I'm calling for its urgent passage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Recto.
Mr. President, to co-sponsor the measure, I move to recognize Senator Richard Gordon and then Senator Grace Poe, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Mr. President, as a person like many of our colleagues who earnestly seek to improve the lives of our countrymen, I stand before all of you today to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 1465, not just as part of a campaign promise, but also to realize that in our country we have to recognize the role of the farmers in feeding our country. And I join, therefore, the co-author, Senator Ejercito, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Lacson, Legarda, Recto, Villanueva, Villar, and Subiri in supporting this law or this bill. For one, I know this bill will bring a lot of difference and change in the lives of Filipino farmers. This bill seeks to remove the payment of irrigation fee services to small farmers having no more than 5 hectares, and it seeks to condone unpaid irrigation service fees and its corresponding penalties. Moreover, the loans of irrigation associations from the National Irrigation Administration are also to be condoned, including their corresponding interest and penalties. As studies show, the rural population in our country is 56% of the country's population, and out of that percentage, 35% of the rural population are poor. The incidence of poverty is significantly higher among agricultural workers at 42.2%, compared to all workers at 23.4%. Therefore, it cannot be denied that there really is a need to alleviate poverty in rural areas where the main source of livelihood is farming, which accounts to 30.4% of the total employment of the Filipinos. So hindi tayo magtataka na talagang hindi makaangat ang ating mga kababayan na mga magsasaka sapagkat maraming pabigat sa kanila. Naandyan na yung mga middlemen na nagpapautang ng mataas sa interest at pagbabayad na mababa ang bayad, no? So it's important that we realize also that we could be more productive if the government pays attention to irrigation, especially on the 400,000 hectares that are in constant disrepair and still growing. Sabi na nga kanina ni Senator Recto na marami talagang irrigation na sira at hindi mapagawa. In fact, kung papagawa yan, it would mean that our country will probably be self-sufficient and will no longer import o mag-angkat ng bigas sa ibang bansa. In contradistinction, we're all aware of the fact that from the 1940s after the war, the Japanese government and the Japanese people have always protected their farmer. Ang farmer sa Japan is on a special pedestal, so much so that they practically, now is in violation of many of the agreements, were subsidizing farmers per cocoa of rice. Yun ang sinasabi, yung cocoa of rice must be protected at all costs. And that is why mahal ang bigas pero walang nagrarayot doon sa Japan. Dito itaas ang bigas, magkakagulo na tayo, which created a situation of total dependence and total lack of effort to improve and become entrepreneurial. Now, this representation will be also sponsoring the agricultural free patent law, which will free up farmers with agricultural free patent rights in terms of to about a hectare of land, and therefore allow them to have more access to credit and to capital. And in this slide, the irrigation law, as already described, will help alleviate the suffering of our farmers, and it's important that we show our countrymen that there is that caring by the Senate and by the country for the people who supply us with the rice that is needed by many Filipinos today. Upon the passage of this bill, therefore, small farmers will surely benefit from lower costs in agricultural production. At least they won't bother with such additional costs, and they may instead focus more on mechanization and technology, which other countries have found very useful, and according to Senator Villar, is really the key in order to address global competitiveness in the market. Ultimately, this bill will help in ensuring a stable and progressive agricultural economy for our country that would lead to better food sufficiency, equitable access to opportunities, and sustained productivity to raise the quality of life in rural areas and attain overall national developments. In other words, Mr. President, if the job of our country, the leadership of this country, is to uplift the level of economic situation of the many who are poor, and the many who are poor are in the countryside, and they are called magsasaka or farmers. With that, Mr. President, and my esteemed colleagues, I fervently ask the urgent passage of Senate Bill number 1465, to which I know will greatly help and assist our small Filipino farmers in the further growth and development of our agricultural economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gordon.
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Sponsorship speech lang.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Senator Grace Poe, Mr. President, to co-sponsor the measure.
Senator Grace Poe is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to manifest my support for the bill supporting free irrigation for small farmers. In fact, Mr. President, we know that it's been mentioned by several manifestations that water is the lifeblood for these farmers, and in fact, with the free irrigation, with water available, the farmers usually, ang ating mga magsasaka, nakakapag-ani lang yan mga isang beses sa isang taon. Kung wala pong tubig dahil sila ay dumidepende lamang sa ulan. Pero pag merong libreng tubig, sila po ay makakapag-ani ng lagpas 2 beses o 5 beses sa 2 taon, imbes na 2 beses lamang. Malaking tulong sa kanilang ito dahil sa bawat ektarya, ang kinikita ng mga magsasaka ay maliit pa sa 20,000 pesos kada taon kung 1 beses lang sila aani. So kung 5 ang kanilang ektarya, magkano lang kanilang kikitain, babayaran pa nila yung mga utang nila para naman sila ay makapagtanim. Kaya marami nga sa ating mga magsasaka, mga nagtatanim ng bigas, yung kanilang inaani ay ginagamit lamang nila para sa sarili, binibenta nila, pero sila rin mismo ay bumibili rin ng bigas. sila rin ay consumers dahil nga hindi rin sapat ang kanilang kinikita o ang kanilang inaani. Ang akin lamang nais sabihin ay bantayan rin natin yung administrative costs ng pagkakaroon ng free irrigation. Sapagkat nakita naman natin na malaki din ang budget na pupunta dito sa central office sa Metro Manila na wala naman talagang mga sakahan. Kaya importante na mabantayan din mabuti na mapunta mismo sa bulsa ng ating mga magsasaka ang pondo para sa libreng irigasyon. Kaya yun lamang dahil yung pagbibigay din ng technical support ay mahalaga. Importante rin na magkaroon ng mekanisasyon sapagkat kung ikaw ay mag-aararo ng 1 hektarya ng lupa, ay ilang kilometro ang iyong ilalakad para lamang makumpleto ang pag-aararo nito. Sabi nga ng iba, parang naglakad ka ng Metro Manila papuntang Baguio kung ikaw ay mag-aararo ng lahat ng lupain na 5 hektarya. So yun lamang at ako'y nagpapasalamat na masama na suportahan itong napakahalagang programa ng gobyerno.
Thank you, Senator Po. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report 103.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order. Senate Bill 1466 under Committee Report 104.
Any objection? Hearing none.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1466 under Committee Report 104.
Any objection? Hearing none.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act prohibiting the imposition of expiry dates on gift checks, certificates, or cards by issuers and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Trade and Commerce and Entrepreneurship, Senator Mig Zubiri, be recognized.
Senator Zubiri is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, as chairman of your Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, it gives me great honor and privilege to present to you Senate Bill number 1466, otherwise known as the Gift Check Act of 2017 under Committee Report number 104. This bill is a final outcome of a series of public hearings, technical working group meetings, and consultations we've had and conducted with stakeholders of both public and private sectors. As a brief backgrounder, the DTI, in its Administrative Order number 10-04, series of 2010, has set guidelines on the issuance and use of redemption of gift checks, certificates, or gift cards in accordance to Republic Act 1794 or the Consumer Acts of the Philippines. The said department order prohibits all suppliers, issuers, and distributors and sellers from issuing or selling gift certificates, checks, and cards with an expiry date, but exempts gifts, certificates, checks, and cards that are distributed to consumers under awards, loyalty, promotional programs. Further, the department order allows that goods and services purchased with gift certificates, checks, and cards be qualified in promotional sales activities, loyalty programs, warranties, return policies for cash purchases, and discounts for senior citizens or persons with disabilities. This policy stems from the general idea that since gift checks are bought with cash, and cash has no expiration date, then it should follow that the same value stored inside the instrument can be it a certificate, check, card, and gift card should likewise not expire. With this bill, we seek to institutionalize the mechanisms already established by the above-mentioned department order and add more teeth to its implementation by subjecting the violators with fines and penalties. We have before us, Mr. President, a measure that aims to promote the general welfare of the consumers and protect their interests by ensuring that they are not deprived of the right to enjoy their hard-earned money. I enjoin our colleagues to support the measure and hope for the immediate passage of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri.
Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1466 under Committee Report 104.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1281 under Committee Report 23.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the Sagip-Saka Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellations. So may I therefore move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Francis Pangilinan.
Senator Pangilinan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, the reservation for interpellation was manifested by Senator Recto. We have just discussed during the session, Mr. President, that he is no longer going to interpellate and that he will withdraw his interpellation and we can therefore terminate the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
The chair takes note.
In that case, I move to close the period of interpellations, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
As a notice to the members of the Senate, we will calendar the Senate bill for committee amendments or perhaps individual amendments if they are ready tomorrow, Mr. President. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1281 under Committee Report 23.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan.
And thank you too to Senator Recto.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1431 under Committee Report number 59.
Any objection? Hearing none.
This is the measure on the Tulong Trabaho Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is now we're in the period of interpellations. So may I therefore move to recognize the sponsor, the Chair of the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Senator Joel Villanueva, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Franklin Relon.
Senator Villanueva is recognized. And the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman yield to a few questions?
Yes, Mr. President, gladly to the Senate Minority Floor Leader,
Mr.
also the General Manager of Golden State Warriors who won today.
Mr. President, may we know and spread it to the record, what is the rationale for this Tulong Trabaho Act?
Mr. President, the bill's primary consideration, and if I may expound on its salient features, we seek to institutionalize and legislate for perpetuity a fiscal allocation in the budget to be provided to TESDA in order to fully capacitate the Philippine Labor Force Competencies Competitiveness Program. The institutionalization, Mr. President, of the Tulong Trabaho Fund will ensure sustainability and access to TESDA training programs, particularly for those who will not be able to afford the financial requirements of these training programs. Mr. President, the training programs that will be available are those to be determined by the TESDA board based on pertinent job market reports and studies to be provided by the Department of Labor and Employment to address the challenges of job and skills mismatch. Again, Mr. President, the bill lays the foundation for future programs that will strengthen the TVET programs, or the Technical Vocational Education and Training Programs of TESDA, by encouraging collaboration with the private sector, institutionalizing a system for determining job qualifications and other engagements to ensure employment, Mr. President.
Do we understand it, Mr. President, that the bill seeks to institutionalize, number one, the programs, number two, the funding?
Yes, Mr. President, and at the same time established a competitiveness program, Mr. President, stated in the bill, and if I may, in Section 5, the establishment of Philippine Labor Force Competencies Competitiveness Program. And perhaps, Mr. President, it is it would be helpful for our colleagues to explain what this program is about. And it is a system that aims to address two major concerns of our Philippine workforce. First, Mr. President, is to institutionalize access to the national system of technical vocational education and training. Again, we wanted, Mr. President, to work within the system and enhance the system. Mr. President, according to Philippine Institute for Development Studies, training and vocational education and training should be accessible to 3 types of stakeholders, namely unemployed, currently employed who want to increase their income, and the employed who want to retool. And that is why we believe that indeed, Mr. President, it's important as according to PIDS, access is not just about availability of training per se, but also should also be defined in terms of availability of financing for those who wants training. And secondly, Mr. President, it aims to provide a system that will eventually diminish the possibility of job market mismatch in the Philippines. The Department of Labor and Employment has itself stated that job vacancies exist in the job market. However, it is the lack of skills to be employed that hounds the Filipino workforce. And according to a local human resource conglomerates, Mr. President, and I would just like to share this, out of 1,000 potential applicants, employees, 100 will qualify for the positions they are aiming for. And only 36% of them will pass the basic employability competency test. And among those who pass, between 20 to 22 people will go to the interview process. And out of that figure, a mere 8 to 10 people will be successfully hired. And thus, Mr. President, we believe that it is important, as I would share my personal experience being the head of TESDA in the previous administration, the importance of establishing the Philippine Labor Force Competencies Competitiveness Program, which is, I believe, a holistic approach. And again, it aims to democratize access to job skills training in order to gain employment, while enhancing also the opportunities for gainful employment.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. The matter of institutionalizing funding. In our system, funding is through the General Appropriations Act. Are we saying that it is compulsory for the President to include in his budget submitted to Congress funding for this program?
We are pushing for that, Mr. President. As of the moment, there are 3 types of scholarship program that TESDA is implementing. The PESFA, which is under the Gospel Law. And then you have STEP, which is now part of the GAA, the Special Training for Employment Program, and the Training for Work Scholarship Program, which, Mr. President and distinguished Minority Floor Leader, we can also access in implementing this particular funding that we are talking about, the Tulong Trabaho Fund.
Yes. My question, Mr. President, the good sponsor, is, since we have institutionalized the funding in this act, is it now compulsory for the President to include this in the President's budget? Just that...
Yes, Mr. President. We believe that it is important for us to ensure sustainability for the program, not only to maintain this particular Philippine labor competency and competitive program, but also to ensure that what we are producing, what we are implementing when it comes to training would be the same program that the industry needs.
And what happens if the President decides not to fund this program in the General Appropriations Act, Mr. President?
Well, the main reason why we are pushing for the for this particular measure, Mr. President, is so that we'll be able to ensure that there will be funding. in establishing this Philippine labor force competitiveness program?
I will not pursue further the question. It's quite obvious that we could not compel the president to include in the president's budget submitted to Congress funding for this program, which we all agree is a good program, but we assume that the president will agree with us, but we just want to place of record that as a matter of budgetary principle, you cannot compel the executive branch to include funds in the budget. In fact, under Section 7, you indicated that the funds necessary for the implementation of the act shall be included in the General Appropriations Act. And the General Appropriations Act is enacted by Congress, and Congress can also choose not to fund this program. In any case, so I just want to spread that on the record, that the controlling instrument is the General Appropriations Act, and we can state the policy in the law, but if the executive branch would not agree with that policy, there is nothing that we can do. That's the system of check and balance in our government.
Thank you, and we appreciate the wisdom of the minority floor leader. And again, it is to pursue this policy framework that we need this particular law, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, you have enumerated in Section 9, Section 12, and Section 13 policies related to the recipients. For example, you define who are the qualified recipients who would access to the Tulong Trabaho Fund. My question is this the criteria and processes found in Section 9, Section 12, Section 13 of the law, criteria and processes in the existing TESDA regulation and policies?
In some,
And are we just codifying this, Mr. President?
well, in some cases, Mr. President, for example, the PESFA fund under the GASP law, that you are at least 15 years of age. While if you look at the present budget of TESDA for training for work scholarship program, the years of age would differ because you would have to be 18 years of age. And then for special training for employment program, it is a scholarship program that when implemented, Mr. President, hindi lang po training program yung binibigay, but after the competency assessment, if you pass the competency assessment and you get certified by TESDA, you will also receive a toolkit, Mr. President.
Mr. President, my problem with this setup is that once we set it in the law, you can no longer change the criteria and processes without going back to Congress. Today, the criteria may be in order, but we do not know if we can maintain the criteria 5 years from now. And if we want to change the criteria for whatever reason, then we have to go back to Congress. May we know the thoughts of the sponsor on this particular matter?
Thank you, Mr. President. In fact, if you look at the same programs that being implemented in TESDA, the TWSP, PESFA, and STEP, you would come into conclusion that the qualified recipients based on this particular measure that we are pushing is more general and more accessible to the public. Mr. President, it institutionalizes the guidelines. However, 15 years old is the labor age for labor workforce, I believe, is more inclusive, and right now is becoming the general concern and the international standard, Mr. President.
Yeah, but precisely what we're saying is that maybe we should leave it to the administrative agencies to set this criteria and process, because these processes evolve, and I don't think we should dip our fingers into it. We are not experts here, we're politicians, and this kind of work pertain to those who are technically equipped to handle this kind of process. While we fully agree, and in fact, we have no problem with the standards set in the law as authored by the good sponsor, we have some concern that we put this in the law, and we have, when there is need to amend the criteria for some whatever reason, you go back to Congress. That's the same thing that in the same vein that we raised in yesterday's session, the matter of the length of the validity of driver's licenses, because we do not believe that we should cast in stone measures such as this, because it is sometimes our hands are tied unless we go back to Congress, and no flexibility is allowed where we put it all in the law. Again, I leave that to the good judgment of the sponsor and this chamber. We just want to spread that on record.
If I may, Mr. President, I submit to the wisdom of the minority floor leader, and I don't have problems if we're going to do that, as long as, Mr. President, as long as it is industry-based, and as long as it is labor market or Lemire-driven, Mr. President.
Maybe we can provide some flexibility,
Yeah.
but provide those standards mentioned.
Yes, Mr.
So we
President.
say, the criteria can be, or the board or whoever
Yes.
may revise the criteria in the program, so long as it is consistent with. So
I
that
agree,
there is
Mr.
some
President.
flexibility. Otherwise, you'll
Yes.
be caught, tied up to this criteria.
And we don't want to be tied up, Mr. President.
Yes.
I certainly agree to the good gentleman from Iloilo.
Well, I guess we have no more questions, and we thank the gentleman from Bulacan, the good sponsor, in responding to our questions, and we hope to see the amendments reflect the matters that we have discussed on this period of interpolation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much to the minority floor leader, Mr. President, and for the opportunity to defend this very important measure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. President,
Thank you,
to
Senator
continue interpolations, I move to recognize Senator Cynthia Villar.
Senator Cynthia Villar is recognized.
Mr. President, I just want to ask the sponsor of the bill if this bill institutionalizing the budget of TESDA, this is for all the programs of TESDA or for just your particular program?
No, Mr. President, this is a particular program that will focus on establishing a Philippine labor force competencies competitiveness program, and it is more of scholarship program that would be accessed in priority, Mr. President, would be those who are still unemployed based on the industry demands, Mr. President.
So this is not something that will affect agriculture?
No, Mr. President. This is in addition to the existing budget for scholarship program allotted to the agricultural sector, Mr. President.
So what is the budget of TESDA for agriculture? Or rather, the total budget of TESDA, I thought it's around 2.5 billion a year.
If the distinguished lady from Las Piñas is talking about the scholarship program for training for work scholarship program, it is 2.2 billion pesos for this year, Mr. President. I have, I'm
And
sorry
this-
if I have
and-
no data as to how much is being allotted in the agricultural sector.
And your budget is in addition to that.
Yes, Mr. President, it could be in addition, or it could, the agency can also use the existing budget to finance the establishment of this Philippine Labor Force Competencies Competitiveness Program.
So how much do you think you will spend for that?
It's a very good question, actually,
it's
Mr. President.
in addition or be part of that 2.2 budget of
Yes,
billion?
initially, Mr. President, during the committee hearings, we were given some figures like initially 500 million pesos, wherein, again, Mr. President, this funding will be used in industries, emerging industries, key employment generation sectors, where we can ensure that after the training program, our graduates will be automatically employed, Mr. President.
So that is 500 million pesos in addition to the 2.2, or it will be, the 2.2 will be used to fund that 500 million?
Well, Mr. President, we see that it is important that we have an additional funding, Mr. President, for this particular measure, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I'm just concerned because we're building farm schools in every town in the Philippines, and that should be financed by TESDA. And we know that the agricultural workers of the Philippines is 30% of all the workers in the Philippines. So we're looking at 500 to 1 billion pesos to finance this farm schools, and if you will get 500 million, then there will not be enough budget to cover everything. That is why I'm asking what part of the budget will be taken by that, so that we can also consider the budget that will be given to the farm schools in the Philippines. And I intend also to legislate the budget for the farm schools. So I just want our good senator to be informed that there should be enough budget for everything, so that the agricultural sector will not be short of budget for their farm schools.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can see where the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture is coming from. And again, I would like to believe that it should not be coming from the already allocated scholarship funding for the agricultural sector. No diminution of funding for agricultural sector, Mr. President, because I believe even this particular funding that we are talking about, if there is, for example, Mr. President, may programa that will create jobs and will ensure that we'll be able to train and create jobs for our farmers or agricultural workers. This particular Tulong Trabaho Fund can also be accessed, Mr. President.
Okay. I just want to ask the help of our good senator that we should work together, that there will be enough budget in TESDA for everybody.
It will be my commitment, Mr. President, to the distinguished lady, my ninang, to help in any way I can, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. President. And
Thank you,
that's
Mr.
all the
President.
question
Thank you.
I will ask.
Thank you, Senator Villar. Majority Floor.
President, I move to end or terminate the period of interpolation for House Bill Senate Bill 1431, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kaya committee amendment po bukas na. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1431, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Yung sa... Nasa ano kasi yun, nasa Leda. Oo, sa house. Di bale, hindi siya ready. Monday na. Monday na, oh. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of the following House bills under committee reports: 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr. President, these are measures establishing marine hatcheries in various parts of the country. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpolation, so may we recognize the sponsor of the measures, Chairman of the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Senator Cynthia Villar, and to interpolate, the Minority Leader, Senator Franklin Drilon.
Senator Villar is recognized. The Minority Floor Leader, Senator Dillon, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentle lady sponsor of the measure yield the floor to a few clarificatory questions?
It will be my pleasure, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, just to clarify, the bill would need an item, or the 14 bills would need appropriations of public funds in the General Appropriations Act.
Yes. Yes, Mr. President.
And these 14 measures establishing multi-species hatcheries will not be implemented unless funds are appropriated in the General Appropriations Act.
I think the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources have agreed to fund this bill from their budget.
So that if it is not funded, then then we cannot establish these multi-species hatcheries.
The BIFAR have agreed to fund the bill.
Yeah, but
The bills, okay.
Madam,
The BIFAR has a 7 billion budget every year, and a part of this budget will go to the establishment of these marine hatcheries.
all right. Even without a law, these multi-species hatcheries can be established.
Yes, but it is,
If there is appropriation and it is implemented, it can be implemented without the need of a law.
but the congressman from this different district would like to legislate this so
No.
that they can make sure that this legislation will see to it that these marine hatcheries will be established.
Yeah, but if, even without this law, if a budget is provided by in the BIFAR budget and it is implemented, the hatcheries can be implemented. That's all we're saying.
Yes, but it will be at the option of the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources.
I'm
This
sorry?
legislation will see to it that it will be implemented. Mas sigurado po na may implement pag may legislation. Ayan ang gusto po ng atin. Actually, this is a local bill passed by our colleague in the lower house of representatives.
Mr. President, we have no objection to this bill. We are just establishing certain principles that as the laws are being passed substantive laws are being passed, and yet we know for a fact that unless budget is provided, this law will become what we call the unfunded mandates.
Yeah.
That's all I'm pointing at. These this will become unfunded mandates.
Yeah.
And we have been criticized for passing various laws when there is no assurance of funding. Of course, this might be a different case, but the same principle applies. That's all that we are saying, that these bills cannot be implemented without the appropriation under the General Appropriations Act, regardless of the desire of the congressman. Now, similarly, even without a law, a municipal hatchery can be established.
Yes,
Now,
Mr.
in fact,
President.
since there are so many of these hatcheries today are in existence without an enabling law.
Meron, there are but few and far between.
Yeah, but the point is, it can be established without the need
Yes,
of legislation.
Mr. President.
Yes, that's our point. Because
But our congressman legislated these local bills, and I think there is no harm in us approving their local legislation so that we make sure that BIFAR will implement this. Because the problem also with our Department of Agriculture and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, unless we really force them to implement, there is no assurance that they will implement. So in a way, we are forcing them to build these facilities in order to help our local fisher folks, because according to the findings of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, if we are not able to prevent illegal fishing, which I think we will have a hard time preventing, then in the future, which is about 30 years from now, the source of our food will be from aquaculture. And I think the establishment of multipurpose species marine hatchery will help in developing our aquaculture, which will be the source of our fish in the future, in case we are not able to prevent illegal fishing in our ocean. So I think these are very good bills, so that we will ensure that we will have a fish supply in the future when we will have problems in getting fish from the ocean.
we have no problems with the purpose of the bill. Very, very noble purpose. Yes, it can help certainly especially our poor farmers.
Yes.
But
Fisher folks.
we hope that the non-inclusion of other coastal municipalities, provinces and cities would not mean that they will never have these hatcheries, because this is very important and very good for the livelihood of our marginal fishermen. In fact, Mr. President, the records will show that the good sponsor has berated and lambasted the Department of Agriculture and BIFAR officials for their failure to spend the budget.
Yes.
Indeed, that is something that should concern us, the non-implementation of the budgetary allocation, the underspending. And what we're saying is the more critical aspect of this is the implementation and probably our oversight functions, because this is a very good program. It should be established in every coastal municipality and city of our country, Mr. President.
Mr. President, ako naman po ay natutuwa na ang pumunta po dito ay mga mayor nito mga bayan na to. Ako po ay natutuwa na sila na ang naggagawa ng paraan to make sure that our Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources will give them the resources to do aquaculture in their municipalities. So ako naman po ay nahihirapan na ring magbantay to see to it that these agencies of the Department of Agriculture will implement these programs. At ako po ay natutuwa na tumutulong na rin yung mga local governments na sila na rin ang mag-initiate ng legislation to make sure that this Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources will implement these programs. Kaya ako po is asking us that we help them also legislate to make sure and to force this Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources to implement these programs. These programs will, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources will build these marine hatcheries. They will operate them for 2 years, and then they will teach the local government how to operate them in those 2 years. And after 2 years, they will turn over the management of these fish hatcheries to the local government concerned. So this is a very good program, and I think this is a good one between the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources and the municipalities who are concerned here.
Mr. President, we concur and associate ourselves with the statements of the good sponsor. We are in support of this measure, but what we're saying is, in fact, there should be a hatchery in every coastal town or city.
In the
And as proof, and as we said, Mr. President, we are in full support of this program. When we headed this chamber, the 16th Congress, 6 laws were passed establishing municipal hatcheries.
During the last Congress, Mr.
Yeah.
Senate Majority Floor Leader, we established 10, and now we're establishing 14. And if they want to bring in these House bills here, I will all pass them to make sure that we are doing this, because I think this is a very good program, and I think we should really work hard to establish aquaculture in the Philippines, so that when the time comes that there will be no fish in the ocean, then we have fish in our aquaculture projects.
Mr. President, in fact, we should not wait for the congressman.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity for us to establish as many hatcheries as possible through the budget if we allocate the budgetary support. And as we repeat, it is not necessary that we pass a law. The budget can provide the execution of this policy, and we do not have to wait for the congressman, because this is a very meritorious economic activity, and I would encourage our good sponsor that when the budget time comes, she places as many municipal hatcheries as she can, and monitor and exercise oversight functions over the use of this budget, because during the committee hearings, the good sponsor even berated, as I said, the Department of Agriculture and the BIFAR for not implementing the budgetary allocation for this kind of projects. With that, we thank the sponsor for yielding the floor for our questions, and we have no further questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our Senate Minority Floor Leader. I will see to it that we will really support the aquaculture industry. Marami pong salamat.
Yeah. Thank you, Minority Leader. Just one question from the chair, if the sponsor will be willing
Yes.
to answer.
With
How much is one municipal hatchery?
10 million, Mr.
10 million.
Mr. President, and this is 14, so it's 140 million. And the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources can very well afford to build these marine fish hatcheries.
Thank you very much. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, I move to terminate the period of interpolation on the 14 measures, first 14 House bills and committee reports, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May I know
Thank you,
if there are
Mr.
any committee
President.
amendments, Mr. President? Walang committee amendment? No committee amendments, Mr. President.
There will be no committee amendment because it's very simple. You just build marine fish hatcheries and that's it.
What about individual amendments, Mr. President?
I don't,
Your Honor, no individual amendments?
no.
Therefore, I move to close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4848 under Committee Report 63.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to suspend consideration of House Bill 4848.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4850 under Committee Report 64.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 64.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4851 under Committee Report 65.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 65.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4852 under Committee Report 66.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 66.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4853 under Committee Report 67.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 67.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4854 under Committee Report 68.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 68.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4855 under Committee Report 69.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report number 69.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4856 under Committee Report 70.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report number 70.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4857 under Committee Report 71.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 71.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4858 under Committee Report 72.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 72.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4859 under Committee Report 73.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 73.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4860 under Committee Report 74.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 74.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4861 under Committee Report 75.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Committee Report number 75.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to approve on second reading House Bill 4862 under Committee Report 76.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of House Bill 4862 under Committee Report
Is
76.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Congratulations to the sponsor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to our majority floor leader and minority floor leader for facilitating the passage of these local bills on marine fish hatchery. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of the following House bills. House Bill 5176 under Committee Report 96, House Bill 4636 under Committee Report 95, House Bill 5063 under Committee Report 89, House Bill 5211 under Committee Report 94, House Bill 5175 under Committee Report 93, House Bill 5212 under Committee Report 90, House Bill 5064 under Committee Report 91, and House Bill 5177 under Committee Report 92.
Mr. President, before the chair acts on the motion, the records will show that these bills were just sponsored yesterday. We haven't had an opportunity to examine it carefully, and we're not ready to interpolate as of the moment.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, the House bills were sponsored last week.
Yeah? No, it was
House
sponsored only
bills?
yesterday.
Franchises?
Yeah, yesterday laptop.
I move to suspend, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President, to verify.
1 minute
the-
suspension.
the-
Okay lang. Kapon lang to.
Yung ease of doing business natin, na okay na kasi.
Hindi siya ready. Wala tayong magagawa. Alin yun? Alin ang hindi ka ready?
Yung ating ARTA.
Halika, halika.
Senator Drilon, siya lahat ng mga
Ano ba tayo ngayon? Period of interpolation? Amendment na ba? Gusto mo, ikaw na. Sige. Sino pwede magano dito? Tayo na ba? Pwede? Okay.
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I am informed that the manifestation of the minority leader is correct. So, because this was supposed to have been, the House bills were supposed to have been sponsored last Wednesday. That is why the office of the Rules Committee thought that it was sponsored Wednesday, but we adjourned early, and it was only sponsored yesterday. So therefore, I withdraw my motions.
There be no objection. The motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 812 under Committee Report Number 5.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the supplies allowance for public school teachers. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellations. So may I move to recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Civil Service, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Oh, yun, sige, ikaw muna. Sige.
Thank you.
I move to close the period of interpellations, Mr. President.
There is a motion to close the period of interpellation. There being no objections, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of committee amendments.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
May we recognize the sponsor, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, for the committee amendments.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 1, line 5, delete thereof the monetary figure 3,000 and in lieu thereof replace the same with the monetary figure 3,500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, the motion is approved. Mr. President, yes, Majority Floor Leader. We'd like to recognize Senator Ralph Rector.
Just an amendment to the amendment. I think that is in order. 1 minute suspension.
Session is suspended for 1 minute. Session is resumed. So we'd like to see clarification. Did we approve the previous amendment by the sponsor?
Ooh, there is no objection, Mr. President.
Therefore, there being no objection, the motion or the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the same page, line 9, between the words 1,000 and pesos, insert the words 500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On the same page and line, delete thereof the monetary figure 3,000 and in lieu thereof replace the same with the monetary figure 3,500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
On the same page, line 11, between the words 1,000 and pesos, insert the words 500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
On the same page and line, delete thereof the monetary figure 1,000 and in lieu thereof, replace the same with the monetary figure 1,500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On the same page, line 14, between the words 1,000 and pesos, insert the words 500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On the same page and line, delete thereof the monetary figure 1,000 and in lieu thereof, replace the same with the monetary figure 1,500. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
There are no more committee amendments, Mr. President.
Mr.
Majority Leader.
President, may I close the period of committee amendments?
There is a motion to close the period of committee amendments. There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of individual amendments.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
Mr. President, Senate President Aquilino Pimentel has submitted his proposed individual amendments, and I will adopt the said amendments. So, on page 1, section 5, line 9, insert the phrase per teacher per school year after the monetary figure of 3,000, which was now amended to 3,500.
Accepted, Mr. President.
The motion is accepted by the sponsor. There being no objections, amendment is approved.
Still on page 1, section 5, line 11, insert the phrase per teacher per school year after the monetary figures, 1,500.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted by the sponsor and there is no objection, motion is approved.
Still on page 1, section 5, line 13, insert the phrase per teacher per school year after the monetary figure, 2,500.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted by the sponsor and there being no objection, the motion is approved.
Still on same page, section 5, line 14, insert the phrase per teacher per school year after the monetary figure, 1,500.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Still on the same page, section 5, line 15, insert the phrase per teacher per school year after the monetary figure, 2,500.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Also, on section 5, insert per teacher per school year after the figure, words and figures. Let me just read the entire section, Mr. President, on funding. An amount of 3,500 per teacher per school year shall be annually appropriated in the General Appropriations Act for the grant of teaching supplies allowance, provided, that in the first year of effectivity of this act, the amount of 1,000 pesos, figures 1,500 pesos in words and figures, per teacher per school year, shall be charged against the current appropriations of the DepEd for the purpose, while the amount of 2,500 pesos in words and figures per teacher per school year shall be charged against any available funds and/or savings of the national government, period. Thereafter, the amount of 1,500 pesos per teacher per school year shall be appropriated from the DepEd budget, and the amount of 2,500 pesos in words and figures per teacher per school year shall be charged sourced from the 50% share of government in the aggregate gross earnings of Philippine Gaming Corporation, PAGCO, close and open parentheses, after deducting the 5% franchise tax, period.
I confirm, Mr. President.
There being no
I-
objection?
yes.
Is it a motion?
Yes, Mr.
Majority
President.
Floor Leader? There being an
Yes.
objection, the motion is approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, may we recognize Senator Ralph Recto?
Senator Recto is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. On line 1, section 1, title, replace the year 2016 to 2017.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
Amendment accepted and no objection from the body. Senate, it's hereby approved.
On line 5, replace the amount 3,500 in figures to 5,000 pesos in words and in figures.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On lines 9 to 17, reword the whole section 5 on funding to read as follows. Section 5, funding. In the first year of effectivity of this act, the amount of 2,500 pesos per teacher per school year shall be charged against the current appropriations of the DepEd for the teaching supplies allowance, while the additional amount of 2,500 pesos per teacher per school year shall be charged against any available funds and/or savings of the DepEd. Thereafter, the amount of 5,000 pesos per teacher per school year shall be included in the DepEd budget for the teaching supplies allowance under the General Appropriations Act. I so move, Mr. President.
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
The amendment's accepted and no objections from the body. Hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is all.
Majority Leader.
Move to close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
There's a motion to close the period of individual amendments. Chair hears no objection. Motion approved.
Move to approve on second reading, Senate Bill 812, subject to style, under Committee Report Number 5, subject to style.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 812.
Being no objection, motion is approved.
Dami nito. May tawagin natin siya. Mr. President, may I have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended for 1 minute. Isira, pumalis na.
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1395 under Committee Report Number 56.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
This is the measure on right-sizing the national government. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation, so I move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Loren Legarda, and to interpellate the Minority Leader,
Okay, sige.
Senator
Yes.
Franklin
Oh,
Drilon.
sige, sige. Okay, okay. Yes, yes.
Right-sizing, go then.
Give me a copy.
I withdraw the motion, Mr. President. Senator Legarda, sponsor, and to interpellate Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Yes, Senator Legarda, the sponsor, is recognized, and to interpolate Senator Risa Hontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would my good Kasimanwa from Panay Island entertain a few questions?
Yes, of course, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've experienced reorganization under the Corazon Aquino government, re-engineering under the Ramos administration, and the rationalization plan under the Estrada and Macapagal-Arroyo administrations. The proposed strategies under Senate Bill 1395 resemble very closely the past rationalization plan. May I ask the good sponsor if any assessment was conducted on these previous initiatives? And where and how did the proponent find the excess fat that we are now seeking to rationalize, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, there have been rationalization of the executive department, as correctly said by Senator Ontiveros. In fact, the most recent one was in 2004, which was more than 10 years ago, under Executive Order number 366. And similarly, the Governance Act of 2011, which the Minority Leader sponsored, was also considered a rationalization, but this was with regards to the government-owned and controlled corporations. So there have been assessments done by the previous administrations, but what we see here, the commonality that we see here is of course, there's been less expenses. Should we call it systems loss is also addressed, and with the right sizing being proposed now, it is hoped that there could be less fat or a leaner, younger, meaner bureaucracy. That is the hope with the government rationalization program of EO 366 then and the proposed right sizing bill before us now.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the good sponsor tells us that there was an assessment conducted on these previous initiatives. But could I reiterate my query as to where the proponent found the excess fat and how did the good proponent find this? Less expenses, less systems loss, these are the objectives we seek to achieve. But before we go to objectives of any new initiative, what excess fat was not trimmed by the previous initiatives? Where in the bureaucracy is this excess fat, and how were they identified, Mr. President?
If the question of the good senator is why should we right size, where is the fat that needs to be excised from this, we can see that there are certain dysfunctions in government that need to be addressed. There are agencies with redundant or duplicating functions, with overlapping mandates and functions. There's the existence of agencies that have actually outlived its purpose. There are services rendered by agencies that could better be provided by the private sector. And so, if given the opportunity, we could actually rationalize all these functions and right-size the national government.
Thank you, Mr. President. According to data from our public sector unions, namely Confederation of Independent Unions in the Public Sector, Philippine Government Employees Association, Philippine Independent Public Sector Employees Association, and Public Services Labor Independent Confederation, all members of the Nagkaisa Labor Coalition. According to them, Mr. President, there are 268,000 unfilled plantilla positions from the four sectors contemplated by the right sizing. The four sectors being LGUs, national government agencies, SUCs, and GOCCs. And yet, despite these couple of hundreds of thousands of unfilled plantilla positions, yet the whole bureaucracy has around 595,000 job orders, contract of service workers, and MOA workers, and 100,000 authorized casuals and contractuals. In total, 695,000 precarious workers or workers in precarious jobs or workers in precarious positions. And if I remember correctly, our good chairman of the Senate Committee on Labor, Senator Joel Villanueva, has also raised these concerns before. It seems to me, Mr. President, that contractualization and non-standard employment are becoming the norm in the public sector. And it's the fear of our public sector unions, based on historical trends, that plantilla positions targeted for abolition will be replaced by flexible, non-standard, and cheap labor of contractuals, while desirable and necessary jobs such as the unfilled plantilla positions I mentioned earlier, these desirable and necessary jobs to keep the government up and running will be outsourced. My question, Mr. President, is what will happen to the 268,000 unfilled plantilla slots under Senate Bill number 1395, Mr. President?
You're correct in saying, Mr. President, that actually these unfilled positions are actually symptoms that agencies are not responding to the needs or are bloated, and therefore there's a need for rationalization. The JOs and others can also be absorbed in the rationalization. And the job orders can be part of the, one of the issues that can be addressed by the committee that will be created because of the passage of this right sizing. Because it is hoped that a committee or a commission will study all the ills of the bureaucracy so that the JO's issue can be addressed further. And these unfilled positions, because they have not served the purpose for which it was created, can be part of the rationalization, and those positions can be excised from the bureaucracy if not needed.
Thank you, Mr. President. But still, for me, a common sense question would be, if there are a couple of 100,000 unfilled plantilla positions, then why were they not instead filled by the triple number of 600,000 plus precarious workers? Would, at the proper time, would the sponsor be open to an amendment, and of course subject to style, to the effect that these unfilled plantilla positions will be filled first from the existing complement of job orders, contract of service, MOA workers, casuals, and contractuals, as long as they meet the qualifications of the Civil Service Commission, Mr. President?
I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you when you say that there's a vacancy. There are JOs. They're doing the job, and they should be receiving the benefits as provided by the plantilla positions. So common sense dictates that they should have been employed and filled up. So why are they JOs when there are vacancies? So that's your point, and I agree with you. Yes, this representation would be open at the proper time to receive your honor's amendments so that there could be a priority in plantilla positions, so that the JOs, as long as they're qualified and as long as the position is still deemed necessary after the rationalization study has been done, then they should be the priority in hiring, if that's what you mean, Mr. President.
That is what I mean,
I
Mr.
agree with you.
President. Thank you so
Yes.
much to the good sponsor for that agreement in principle. I will propose an amendment at the proper time, of course taking with the premise that these plantilla positions, unfilled plantilla positions, which could be filled by these job orders et al., constitute desirable and necessary jobs to, as I said earlier, keep the government up and running. Before I go to my last question, Mr. President, just a follow-up to my first question. Has the previous RAT plan process been completed? And if the previous RAT plan has been unable to cut the fat, how will this proposal that resembles the previous RAT plan be successful? Because I mentioned earlier, Mr. President, that the proposed strategies under Senate Bill 1395 resemble very closely the past rationalization plans. So if this resembles those, how will this be successful if the previous were not able to
yes.
cut the fat? Mr.
Thank you very
President?
much. That's actually a very interesting question because there's a difference between the RAT plan, the rationalization plan born out of EO 366 and the right sizing being proposed now. Whereas before, in terms of the mechanics of the program, Mr. President, there was the conduct of a strategic review of the operations and the organization of the department and the agency. It was limited only to the units and did not cut across government departments and agencies. Here, in the proposed right-sizing plan, government can implement transformational initiatives in agencies such as mergers, consolidation, splitting, transfer, or abolition of offices. For example, it's just an example, just in my mind. The DBM is not briefing me on this. There are, let's say, water agencies, 30 water agencies. I'm not saying that the committee will do this, it's just an example. There are 30 water agencies lodged in different departments of government. Why not a Department of Water? For example, there are cultural agencies in various departments. Why not the Department of Culture? So perhaps what they did in EO 366 was simply tanggal, tanggal, tanggal. But here what we do is it could cut across agencies and be transformational in terms of shared mandate.
Thank you, Mr. President. To my last question, what kind and level of consultations took place with the rank and file employees during the crafting of the right sizing bill? Because if we are talking about not just professionalizing the bureaucracy, but transforming the bureaucracy, so that is a wide-ranging and quite deep-cutting reform of the bureaucracy. So what consultations took place with the employees during the crafting of this bill, Mr. President?
Well, first, Mr. President, the lessons learned from the rationalization of the past administrations, and in this proposed measure, Mr. President, agencies, units, bureaus will be consulted as well. Accredited public sector unions will be consulted, and before the implementation of the executive branch right-sizing program, there will be massive consultations, Mr. President. So the lessons learned of the previous right-sizing or rationalization, consultations with every department or agency that will be covered by this, which means the executive department, and in the spirit of transparency and participatory governance, the committee which will be created will continue that consultation with all agencies concerned, and I said together also with the accredited public sector unions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that the hope expressed by the good sponsor that even before and during implementation of the envisioned law, that consultation will be conducted. Unfortunately, it would have been even better if the consultation had been conducted before the drafting of the bill. If I could quote briefly from the letter sent by these public sector unions to the good Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management dated April 6th, they expressed their concern that quoting from them, learning from past experiences, government workers ended up being victimized and adversely impacted by reorganization because of lack of representation. The proposed right-sizing bills are devoid of any genuine consultation and involvement of workers and their public sector union or organization before, during, and after processes. So they had hoped to have been involved even in the legislative process, not just after we finish our work here in Congress, when the executive is already engaged in implementing the law. So I hope that at the proper time I can propose some kind of amendment, not to make up for the lack of consultation, because one cannot achieve here on the session floor what should have been done in consultation beforehand, but still, maybe a little catching up that we can do here in the Senate, Mr. President. And lastly,
Allow me just to address that,
Yes,
because
Mr. President.
I'm happy to note, Mr. President, and put on record that no less than the PGEA, the Philippine Government Employees Association, was part of the technical working group that drafted this bill, Mr. President. So, hiniling nila ang mga probiso po ng panukalang batas na ito. And together with the PGEA are the Civil Service Commission, the GSIS, of course DBM, and the Philippine Institute of Development Studies are included that crafted this bill. So there was massive consultation, and as I said, the PGEA, or the Philippine Government Employees Association, helped craft this measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad to hear that PGEA was involved in the TWG. However, they were one of the 4 public sector unions I mentioned earlier, parts of Nagkaisa, which expressed that before, during, and after the process of the drafting of the bill, that there was not consultation and involvement. In fact, the national president of PGEA, Esperanza Ocampo, is one of the signatories to the Good Budget Secretary. But lastly, Mr. President, still in that spirit of trying to catch up, trying to fill a gap, at least partially, if I could just ask lastly the good sponsor, will the public sector unions be included in the right sizing committee, Mr. President?
The committee will be composed of members of the executive branch, but the public sector unions will be consulted in the work of the committee, Mr. President.
At the proper time, Mr. President, would the good sponsor consider a proposed amendment to make the public sector unions not just consultees of the right sizing committee, but members, Mr. President?
That's something that could be looked into, Mr. President. Section 7 of the proposed measure shows the powers and functions of the Committee on Right Sizing in the executive branch. And it's quite lengthy and covers a lot of work. It also says that it will submit proposed organizational structure and proposed executive issuances to the President, and a detailed organizational structure and staffing. And it also says that it will have consultations with all the sectors I mentioned. Now, with regards to the number of members of the committee, the proposed bill states several members of the executive department to be led by the executive secretary and the budget secretary as co-chairs. Now, I'm not certain whether the head of the public sector union can be part of this committee, but of course, any amendment can be proposed on the floor. It can be thoroughly studied and justified. While it may not be part of the original bill, what I just fear, Mr. President, is so many sectors can be represented. This is presently a committee of 5, but we know for a fact that when there's so many members, it would grow. If you accept this and this and this, it may be more than 10. It's so difficult to have a committee of so many representatives. But that could be taken into consideration, and at the proper time, perhaps we could address that. And I could ask the DBM to study that possibility.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the good sponsors' openness to an amendment that I will propose at the proper time. After all, 5 people, even 10 people, or a few more people, I think is not too many to represent the hundreds of thousands of public sector employees that we have, who we know are willing and able to work in partnership with the executive members of a right-sizing committee, even in long and heavy work. Because important work such as this,
Yes.
of right-sizing, modernizing, professionalizing
I can actually
the
accept
bureaucracy,
already
Mr.
your
President.
amendment as early as now.
Thank you, Mr.
While you were
President.
talking, I was thinking about it and talking to the DBM. While they may not be part of the first 5, because there are subcommittees or technical working group, and that's where we can put the experts who know government operations, who know organizational development, who know human resource management, and then we can also put the public sector unions there in the technical working group, just like we do here in the Senate?
I will still propose an amendment, Mr. President, at the proper time to include the public sector unions, not just in subcommittees, not just in the technical working group, but in the right-sizing committee, if the good sponsor would allow.
That's worth
Mr.
looking
President.
into, and thank you for that, that proposal, Mr. President, at the proper time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, good sponsor.
Thank you, Senator Ontiveros.
Mr. President, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other members who wish to interpolate. So at this point, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1395 under Committee Report 56.
Is a motion to suspend consideration? There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may I have a 1-minute suspension?
Session suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1393 under Committee Report number 55.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
This is the measure on on-site insight for informal settlers. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpolation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement, Senator J.B. Ejercito, and to interpolate Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Yes, Senator J.V. Ejercito is recognized, so is with the Honorable Risa Ontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor, sorry. I'm so used to addressing the good sponsor directly. Forgive me, Mr. President. Would the good sponsor entertain a few questions?
Certainly, Mr. President, from the lady from Akbayan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I noticed that the committee report defined People's Plan as a plan formulated and initiated by the beneficiary organization with the assistance of concerned government agencies. My concern is that I feel it's necessary that the definition of People's Plan underscore non-physical development components like livelihood, capability building. History and experience have shown that these are also essential elements of a sustainable housing program. Good sponsor, at the proper time, would you be amenable, would the good sponsor be amenable to an amendment that incorporates this phrase in the definition of People's Plan, which shall contain a site development plan, including non-physical development components, such as self-help housing cooperative, livelihood, self-help development, and capability building, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the lady from Akbayan. Your observation is very good, and this is a very much acceptable amendment in addition to the definition, as we agree that non-physical development components can contribute greatly to the success of the housing program, and therefore I accept, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. To my second to the last question, secondly, I noticed that the provision on off-city resettlement on page 12, line 6 to 9, states that off-city resettlement will be the last resort. My concern is that this wording leaves greater room for government agencies to decide that off-city resettlement should be taken, when the entire point of this bill is to promote in-city or at least near-city resettlement. At the proper time, Mr. President, would the good sponsor be amenable to an amendment on the provision on off-city resettlement, replacing the last resort phrase with only be resorted to when directly requested by the affected ISFs themselves, Mr. President?
Mr. President, to the lady from Akbayan, but I'm sorry, but I disagree with the proposal to replace the phrase, because we foresee instances, no, wherein time is of the essence, like for example,
there is a calamity like Yolanda, wherein the government has to provide housing as soon as possible to the victims of the calamity. And at the same, and also another instance is when we are relocating informal settler families from danger zones, like the waterways and other areas. Safety is our immediate concern. So this should be, we should, time is again is of the essence because we do not want to risk, exposing them to danger. So as much as possible, if we can relocate these informal settler families living in danger zones as soon as possible, we may have to opt for off-city relocation if a people's plan cannot be completed under a reasonable timetable. So in those cases only, Mr. President, for example, there's a calamity, and at the same time, if informal settler families are living in danger zones, so that when typhoon season comes, especially now that calamities often visit our country more often, so we would want to, as much as possible, with urgency, move these informal settler families away from the danger zones and into off-city relocation sites.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand the explanation of the good sponsor, and I look forward to working with him perhaps on other provisions where these situations of off-city relocating ISF families who have been victims of natural disasters or are in danger zones, but who may constitute an exception of emergencies within the whole population of ISFs, but that their safety shall be upheld as paramount, and yet that the last resort phrase will not put at a disadvantage other kinds of informal settler
In
families.
fact, Mr. President, if I may add, the reason why this measure is, we are pushing this measure is for us to be able to redevelop informal settler communities within the city, addressing problems, current problems that are being experienced by the current housing program, such as dislocation and not having services and utilities. So be rest assured, I'd like to say, tell the lady from Akbayan that be rest assured that I'll be very much willing to work with her and also promote in-city housing to our informal settler families, to give them a chance to have their own homes, and at the same time to improve their living conditions, no? And also to address some apprehensions, no? That we are not, sinasabi kasi nila, baka we should decongest Manila, but we will be targeting informal settler communities, no, and redevelop them. So that, for example, if there's a 10-hectare property that's full of informal settler communities, we can build medium-rise housing units, and we will only take up about 3 to 4 hectares, and we will even have 5 to 6 hectares room for development. So that is the plan, and that is the rationale, Mr. President and lady from Akbayan. That is the rationale behind this measure.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for that affirmation, which I think really best comes from the good sponsor, because he has been championing on-site, in-city relocation as the chairman of our Senate Committee on Urban Development. So thank you for that, Mr. President. To my last question, one of the important provisions in our bills was providing the ISFs with adequate and genuine consultation mechanisms, which include effective dissemination of relevant information and documents, including land records, housing budgets, the proposed plan, among others. And as I remember, Mr. President, during the public hearing of this bill, it was mentioned that there are 3,419 hectares available public lands for socialized housing in Metro Manila. However, at the time, until now, the details of those haven't been released or provided by the concerned government agency during the public hearing and technical working group meetings on this measure. May I know from the good sponsor, Mr. President, if such document or list of available lands has already been made available to the committee, Mr. President?
Actually, Mr. President, distinguished lady, this is a product or offshoot of the National Housing Summit
which was a joint effort by the Senate and the House of Representatives together with the World Bank last year. And right now, the committee already has the records, no, of the inventory of land in the National Capital Region, and I will instruct the committee secretary to furnish all the senators with a copy of the same. And just to add, out of in the technical study done by the Land Registration Authority, it's true that they came up with about 3,419 hectares, no, that was identified that could be possible lands for development for in-city socialized housing. And if you add 1,200 hectares of those properties have informal settlements. So these are our priority areas, Mr. President. The 1,200 hectares of informal settler committee will be our priority to redevelop so that we will be solving so many problems, Mr. President. One is, of course, we will be able to address the housing backlog, and second, we will give the chance to our informal settler families to be able to at least uplift their living conditions and give them dignity. Sabi nga natin, dapat walang tawaging squatter sa sariling bayan. And that is the very purpose of this measure, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you so much, good sponsor. I look forward to continuing to work with the good sponsor on achieving our common dream of livable cities. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and to the sponsor, Senator J.V. Ercito. Before we move on, the Chair would just like to recognize in the gallery the presence of the Budget Secretary, Secretary Benjamin Joknos, with us today. You're welcome to the Senate, Secretary. I believe he's here to support the right-sizing bill of Senator Lauren Legarda. Majority Floor Leader.
Meron pa yes, Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1393.
There is no objection to the motion. The motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1454 under Committee Report 79.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
This is the measure on Agricultural Free Patent Reform Act of 2017, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measure is still in the period of interpellation. I move to recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, Senator Richard Gordon.
I believe they're having a hearing also in the back. Senator Gordon, you're recognized to sponsor your measure.
Mr. President,
Yes, Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, this is the Free Patent Bill, and we're ready for interpellation from the distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senate President Franklin Drilon. I still call him Senate President.
maybe recognize the Minority Leader, Mr.
The
President.
distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Frank Drilon, is recognized.
Mr. President, as shown in the last 2 session days, the entire chamber is scrambling on a number of measures because we wish to pass the same by adjournment next week. However, we have requested the office of the Majority Leader, and he graciously agreed that for the bills this week, at least we be given a chance to read it and study it before it is placed on the calendar. And the office of the Majority Leader has submitted to us and to all the members of the chamber the bills that were scheduled for debates today and tomorrow. This particular measure on the floor now, Mr. President, is not one of those in the list. We do not wish to delay. If there are others who would wish to interpolate, we have no problems with that. We just wish to be given time to have our interpolation next week and let the others who may be ready to interpolate do so. We just manifest that we are not ready as of now, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I appreciate the concern of the Senate Minority Leader, And if I may prevail on my good friend Senator Lauren Legarda, as she has counseled us earlier that we should be quiet when other people are on the floor. Otherwise, I will call for the orders of the day, and I don't want to do that to a very lovely lady. And she continues to talk and rant while we're talking here, Mr. President. Maybe I will ask her to stop talking while I'm interrupting.
Yes, we'd like to ask our colleagues to,
Yes,
Senator Legarda.
because we have a visitor, Secretary Jokno is here. He was the one with the loud voice, Mr. President.
Yes, we had acknowledged his presence earlier during the hearing, during
That
the
is what I
session.
call gender abuse, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Yes, go ahead,
Mr.
Senator.
President,
Gordon.
I fully appreciate the concerns of my good friend, the Senator and the floor leader. But if memory serves correct, we started the presentation of this bill last week, and we agreed that we would take this bill at the next session. And my staff worked hard, and there are other government agencies that work hard on this. It is not a complicated bill. We're ready to answer questions. And I do know that most of the questions will be coming from the experience of and wisdom of the Senate Minority Floor Leader. So I would like to prevail upon him to continue so that we can finish this, because this is a matter of grave importance to the many who are poor, and we'd like to have them get their titles after so many years of waiting, Mr. President. We just passed the irrigation bill, Mr. President. This is a companion bill. Farmers who have agricultural land under pre-patent will now be able to own their land, and the restriction on selling it will now be lifted, and they will now have access to credit, they will now have access to development and entrepreneurship. So I know that the gentleman has a very big heart, and he will not, I don't think we will be impoverishing the wisdom of the Senate, because there are a lot of them who know about this bill, and support this bill, Mr. President. So I would like to prevail upon the good gentleman so to do.
Majority Floor Leader.
May I have 1 minute suspension, Mr.
Session
President?
suspended for 1 minute. Siyempre.
Oh, ngayon? 10 minutes. Sandali lang. 10 minutes yung minority leader. Ha? Hindi, may boxing pa eh. May tatanong ka sa kanya dito?
Wala. Wala. Ako na nga bibili. Alright. Church leader? Oh. Huwag may merienda sa bo. Matagal-tagal na.
O isa pang round. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1454 under Committee Report 79 for tomorrow.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Senator Gordon is
Mr. President,
recognized.
that's subject to the condition that tomorrow we will take it up, if that's
Yes,
okay.
I've already scheduled the
Yes, Mr. President.
bill, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1306 under Committee Report number 31.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the fifth round of the third round of the creating the Philippine Boxing Commission. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpolation. So
Is
may
this
we
an
recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Sports, Senator Manny Pacquiao, and to interpolate the minority leader, Senator Dillon.
So if we are not done today, this becomes a professional interpolation, no longer an amateur interpolation. Minority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman from General Santos, the good sponsor, continue to yield the floor for questions on this measure, Mr. President?
It's an honor, Mr. President.
Mr. President, during the previous sessions, we were branded as having no common sense because allegedly, given the fact that there were 22 or so sporting or sports being supervised by the GAB could not possibly supervise the boxing industry, which, by the way, is considered by the good gentleman sponsor as big business. Okay, now, just for the record, Mr. President, can we spread to the record the history of the creation of the Games and Amusement Board? When was this board created and for what purpose?
One minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended for a minute.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, boxing, wrestling, and karate, Executive Order number 120, series of 1948. So the GAB was created on 1948, Mr. President.
And it had supervisory authority over which professional sports again, Mr. President?
Boxing, wrestling, and karate, Mr. President.
Boxing, wrestling, and karate. To our knowledge, Mr. President, karate was not existing in 1948, unless by, but I can stand to be corrected. Was karate there already in 1948 that deserved supervision by the GAB, Mr. President? Was there was there a professional group of karate players supervised by GAB in 1948? I'm willing to be educated, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it's under a boxing and contact sports division head.
There was a karate division in 1948.
Yes, Mr. President, ayan po yung nakasulat dito sa Executive Order, Mr. President, 120.
Executive Order number 120.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ano? And that's Executive Order 120. Okay na. Mr. President, we read Executive Order number 120, series of 1948. The professional sports under GAB then was boxing, wrestling, racing, and high-alai. There was no karate.
Mr. President, Section 7, there is hereby created under the executive supervision of the Executive Secretary an office to be known as the Game and Amusement Board, to be composed of 3 members appointed by the President with the consent of the Commission on Appointments.
We're talking about the sports supervised, not the membership of the GAB, Mr. President.
Wala daw karate dito. Yes, Mr. President, there's no karate
Sorry?
in the list, Mr. President, on the executive executive order 320, Mr. President.
I'm sorry. We were referring to Executive Order 120 as mentioned by the good sponsor.
This is executive order, Mr. President, 320, Mr. President. This is different to the 120, Mr. President, and I stand corrected, Mr. President.
May we know what is the title of Executive Order 320, Mr. President?
Executive Order number 392, 1950, Mr. President.
Not 392, not 3.
392, Mr. President.
All right. And under 392, what
Series of
sports-
1950, Mr. President.
series of 1950, and what were the what sports or professional sports were covered under EO 392, Mr. President? Is it high-alai, boxing, wrestling, and racing, Mr. President?
Racing, boxing, wrestling, and high-alai, Mr. President.
Right. No, so now What about horse racing, Mr. President? What happened to it?
There's a horse racing, Mr. President, presidential decree number 420, creating the Philippine Racing Commission.
The Philippine Racing Commission,
At tinanggal na po ito, Mr. President.
tinanggal
Tinanggal na po sa GAB.
I'm sorry?
Tinanggal na po ito sa GAB.
It was removed from the GAB.
Yes, Mr. President.
And but if I recall correctly, is it correct to say that the regulatory authority of GAB over horse racing was transferred to the Philippine Racing Commission?
Yes, Mr. President, 1974, Mr. President.
Yes. Were all the aspects of horse racing transferred to the Philippine Racing Commission, or were some functions retained by the GAB?
I presume, Mr. President, under this law, nine- 1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Just want to
Yes. Session suspended.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, on 1974, June 18, the presidential decree number 420, March 20, 1974, Mr. President, horse racing is separated from the GAB. Only the licensing, Mr. President, is in the GAB. Yung lisensya lang ang mananatili doon sa GAB.
Licensing of the jockeys were left to the GAB.
Yes, Mr. President, correct.
Now, going forward, there were a number of sporting events which became professional, which had a professional division. For example, there was the Philippine Basketball Association, which was a professional basketball league, and the GAB was given supervisory authority over the basketball. Is that a correct recollection, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. 1976, Mr. President. Presidential decree number 871.
Yes. So, by how many sports activities were under the GAB at that point? We have basketball, boxing, wrestling.
Wrestling.
What else?
High alay, Mr. President.
High alay. Basketball, boxing, high alay. What else, Mr. President?
Wrestling, Mr. President. That's it.
Wrestling. What else, Mr. President?
The supervision of the games in Management Board, boxing, wrestling, high alay, mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, basketball, billiards, cycling, golf, cockfighting, beating on horse racing, tennis, dance sport, motocross, Mr. President.
All of these sporting events would refer only to those which are in the professional aspect of the sports. In other words, where the athletes play for pay, as distinguished from amateur sports. Is that a correct statement, Mr. President?
Correct, Mr. President.
In fact, the thrust of the law is to promote professionalism.
Correct, Mr. President.
Now, let's discuss the matter of, let's say, basketball. To what extent is the supervisory function of the GAB on professional basketball? Is it that they interfere in the way the basketball professionals are playing are performing their profession? Or do they simply issue licenses?
I think, Mr. President, licensing and regulation, like game fixing, everything.
Regulation, so you're saying licensing and regulation in terms
Or
of...
point saving and play for play in local basketball circle.
In where? In local?
Local basketball circles, Mr. President.
Aren't there... No, isn't the authority of the GAB only over professional basketball players?
Yes, Mr. President.
So they have no business supervising basketball games in town fiestas, for example, because these are usually amateurs.
Correct, Mr. President.
All right. Are there professional wrestlers in our country today?
Yes, Mr. President, we have a professional wrestlers, Mr. President.
Oh, I'm sorry, but can the sponsor share with us who are professional wrestlers in our country?
It's included to fighters, Mr. President, who are in the list in boxing statistics.
I'm sorry, sir.
It's included the list of fighters, Mr. President.
No, we're ignorant of we are ignorant of the sports of wrestling, and we are asking who are our professional wrestlers in the country who may be under the regulation of GAB.
We don't know who are they, Mr. President, but it's included to the mixed martial art, Mr. President.
Our point is, wrestling is a distinct sport from mixed martial arts. Wrestling has been there for several decades, and mixed martial arts is of recent activity, recent sports. So, because the gentleman asserted that there are so many sports activities being supervised by GAB, for which reason common sense dictates that boxing should be separately supervised. And that is why we're trying to test whether, in fact, all of these professional sports is being supervised by GAB, and to what extent are they supervising it? Because, as we all know, from our information, practically 1/3 of the personnel in the GAB just supervises and takes care of the affairs of boxing. And the others are the other sports activities or professional sports activities are simply allowed practically to run themselves without any intervention from GAB. That is why GAB would really concentrate on boxing. So again, we repeat our question. How many professional wrestlers are there in the country, which GAB is supposed to supervise in terms of their activities? Professional wrestlers.
Mr. President, we don't have exactly data about how many professional wrestlers in our country, but I believe that the professional wrestlers evolved to mixed martial art, Mr. President.
All right. Now, okay, cycling. How many cycling activities do we have the whole year? How many tournaments do we have? To my recollection, there's only 1 or 2 big cycling events every summer.
We don't have data right now, Mr. President, about the professional cycling, Mr. President.
Isn't it a fact that the involvement of GAB is only to license professional cycling, if any, in the country?
Yes, Mr. President.
So really, the time consumed for cycling is not substantial, in fact, very negligible. Now, on golf, which is, I assume, is also included in the ambit of the authority of the GAB.
Can you repeat the question, Mr. President?
Is golf, are professional golfers and the profession of golfing regulated by the GAB?
Yes, Mr. President.
And what is the extent of their supervision?
Giving license, Mr. President.
Other than giving licenses, the GAB does not interfere in in the tournaments, in other aspects of golf, professional golf.
No, Mr. President.
Now, what about billiards? There are professional billiards in our billiard players in our country.
That's correct, Mr. President.
But again, the regulatory authority of GAB is only to issue licenses to billiard professional players.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Other than that, they don't do anything else. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, table tennis is also mentioned as among the professional sports activities which the GAB would supervise. May we know what is the extent of the supervision of GAB over table tennis?
License.
Or are there professional table tennis players in our country?
There's no table tennis, Mr. President. It's a tennis, Mr. President.
Lawn tennis.
Lawn tennis, Mr.
Are there
President.
professional lawn tennis players in our country?
Yes, Mr. President.
Who are they, Mr. President?
We don't have the exact name of those professional tennis players, Mr. President, but I don't memorize their names, but I met some of those professional tennis players in our country, Mr. President.
Just the number. Would the gentleman know the number? And the reason for this question is we are showing that, in fact, GAB is doing nothing insofar as these other sports activities are concerned. Lawn tennis, the gentleman is at a loss, for example, as to give us just the number of tennis players supervised, but just the names of the professional tennis supervised, the activities that the GAB would monitor for professional lawn tennis players. Isn't that an indication that, in fact, GAB, while in name, would be in charge of supervising professional lawn tennis players? In fact, it does not perform any function for that sport?
Mr. President, they don't have record, I think, Mr. President, the GAB, about how many professional tennis players in our country, Mr. President.
And the lack of a record is an indication that, in fact, if the number, in fact, the number of professional lawn tennis players are insignificant or even non-existent, so that the duties of GAB to license is illusory and does not exist, in fact?
I cannot speculate on that, Mr. President.
Yeah, I think you don't want to speculate, but if the gentleman can, since he is the one, our committee chair on games, can the gentleman inquire from the GAB exactly what activity of or who are our professional lawn tennis players, and what are their supervisionary functions, and for that matter on all the other aspects that we raised earlier. And in addition, the GAB is also in theory supervising professional bowlers. The older generation, like Senator Soto, who was in the bowling, would recall Nepomuceno. Senator Soto, being a national champion, would recall his contemporaries like Nepomuceno. Was he a professional bowler, Mr. President?
Can you say it again, Mr. President?
Sorry?
May I interject, Mr. President?
Yes, can this majority leader help us?
We never had professional bowling in the Philippines, but there was a classification of open class bowlers who were technically in the professional level, but they were never called professionals.
So they never secured a license from the GAB?
No, they never
So
did.
that the enumeration of bowling as one of the active sporting events supervised by GAB is a fiction. Because in fact, as you said, there is no professional bowler.
Yes, there never was.
There never was. Yeah, because what we're trying to show by these questions is that, in fact, the present Games and Amusement Board practically does nothing except to supervise the boxing as an industry. All these others are only by name, or if ever they supervise, or if ever they regulate, it's only to the extent of the issuance of the licenses. Ano pa man? Okay. Is football also enumerated as one of those professional sports being regulated by GAB? I think the good sponsor mention that? No.
No, Mr. President.
Ah, But, okay, under the law or regulation, is professional football also among those sports licensed or regulated by GAB?
No, Mr. President, only 13 under by the GOV, Mr. President.
13.
13.
What are those 13 again for the record?
Boxing,
Boxing,
mixed martial arts,
mixed martial
Muay
arts.
Thai,
Can you do it slowly, sir? Boxing, mixed martial arts.
Muay Thai,
Mo-
Muay Thai.
Is that not under mixed martial arts? Is that separate?
No, Mr. President.
Separate?
Separate, Mr. President. Muay Thai,
Muay Thai. Oh.
basketball,
Hold on. All right. Basketball,
billiards,
billiards, yes.
cycling,
Cycling, yeah.
golf,
Hold on. Cycling, golf, yes.
cockfighting,
Cockfighting,
beating on horse racing,
horse racing, betting, all right.
high alay,
High alay. Wow.
long
Is it-
tennis,
Huh?
tennis, Mr. President.
Sorry? Tennis?
Tennis, Mr. President.
Is it lawn tennis or table tennis?
Long tennis, Mr. President.
Lawn tennis, all right. Okay.
Dance sport,
Sorry?
dance sport.
I'm sorry, sir? What was that?
Dance sport, Mr. President.
Dance sports. Dance, sayaw. Dance. Dance sports.
Sport na ngayon, Mr. President eh.
Huh?
Sport na ngayon yan, dance sports. I was starting practicing to dance.
Okay,
Motocross, Mr. President. Motocross the last.
sorry?
Motocross.
Motocross. Okay. So is that 13 now?
Yes, Mr. President.
Boxing, basketball, golf, billiards, mixed martial arts, Muay Thai,
Muay Thai,
Muay Thai, cockfighting. I bet is cockfighting one of those?
cockfighting, Mr. President. Yes.
Cockfighting, and then
Golf,
golf,
cycling,
cycling,
high alay,
high alay,
lawn tennis, Mr. President.
lawn tennis,
Motocross,
motocross, and
dance sports, Mr. President.
dance sports. Ilan yun? 12. There are 12 that you have
13,
enumerated.
Mr. President.
Sorry?
Beating on horse racing, Mr. President.
To our count, there are 12. 12. Maybe the golf was mentioned twice.
Mr. President, and we will provide a copy of this, Mr. President.
Yes, okay. In almost all of this, except for boxing, the activity of GAB is very limited. As for example, in basketball, practically the Philippine Basketball Association is self-regulating. In golf, the GAB's role is limited to licensing. In billiards, also limited to licensing. In cockfighting, isn't it a fact that in cockfighting, the regulatory function has been transferred to the local government units, licensing of cockfighting, supervision over cockfighting? Wala na po sa GAB ito ah.
I believe so, Mr. President.
So, hindi na kasama yan. Now, motocross, also limited to licensing.
Correct, Mr. President.
Now, also lawn tennis. We don't even have professional tennis players that we know of in this country. So I do not know who is being licensed. High Alay. The licensing of High Alay has been transferred in effect to the Cagayan Economic Zone. Wala na sa GAB yan because High Alay is done in the Cagayan Export Zone. Ano ba yan? Eco Zone. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Hayala is separated from the government.
The dance sports, I don't really know what is being regulated here, the number of steps, the style, but anyway, our point, Mr. President, is that GAB's time, resources is practically devoted only to boxing. And if there are 150 in the staff of GAB, probably almost 30% or more of those staff is devoting its time only to professional boxing. In any case, Mr. President, can I have one minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended.
Did it?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we have talked to the sponsor and the minority leader. We will suspend consideration. So I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1306 under Committee Report Number 31. We schedule it tomorrow in case there are interpolations.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1449 under Committee Report Number 62.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure extending the validity of driver's licenses. The parliamentary status is that we were in the period of individual, individual amendments. So I move to open, or I move for the continuation of the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, yesterday, the sponsor introduced her individual amendments, incorporating that of Senator Lacson's inputs as well as the individual amendments of the minority leader. The clean copies of the measure has already been distributed to the body. So may I move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Grace Poe.
The sponsor of the measure, Senator Grace Poe, is recognized.
At present, yes. At present, Mr. President, I have, we no longer were informed of any member of the Senate who wished to introduce any individual amendments. So at this point, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1449 under Committee Report Number 62.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1449.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1397 under Committee Report Number 57.
Is there any objection? Motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the motorcycle crime prevention. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we already terminated the period of interpellation, so we'd like to open the period of committee amendments. May I ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended.
Tinatawag ko.
Anong bill yan?
Motorcycle prevention, crime prevention.
Wait lang ba? May quorum pa ba? Tingin ng bill. May bill ba dyan?
Didn't hear you. Isa na lang ito eh. Isa na lang ito. Wala na yata. May committee. Sinubstitute na niya eh.
Masama pala itong bill na to.
Mr. President, may we resume the session first?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to proceed with the additional reference of business. It's very short.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Will the Secretary please proceed?
The Secretary is directed to proceed.
Additional reference of business, 1468, an act designating casinos as covered persons under Republic Act Number 9160, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001 as amended. Senator Recto. Committee.
To the Committee on Banks,
Finance.
Financial Institutions and Currencies, and Justice and Human Rights.
Resolution 386, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Public Services to review the implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act Number 10913, otherwise known as the Anti-Distracted Driving Act, issued by the Department of Transportation, Land Transportation Office, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To refer to the Committee on Public Services.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, now I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1397.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may we recognize the sponsor? As I mentioned earlier, this is, we have already terminated the period of interpellations. We have opened the period of committee amendments.
Mr. President, we have some. Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, with your permission, let me just begin by introducing some of our individual amendments here. I'll begin with page 1. On page 1, line 2, place a period inside the parentheses inside the close quotation mark, immediately after 2017, open quotes, close quotes, to read as follows. Open quotes, Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act of 2017, period, open and close quotation. That would be the title, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 1, line 3, replace the word state after section 2 with declaration of, to read as follows. Section 2, caps declaration of policy, period.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the good sponsor,
Yes, the minority leader is recognized.
just for expediency, we have been given a copy, typewritten proposed amendments of the good sponsor. Under the rules, this has to be read, and on each proposed amendments, theoretically, we can raise our objection if we do not accept, if we believe that there is something that is objectionable. To have an orderly presentation of the amendments and to save on time, it's already late, may we suggest, if the good sponsor will agree and the body will agree, just to read all of these amendments and act on it when we, in the next session, when the members of the chamber can look at each provision and approve it as we go along, rather than at this point introducing each individual amendment. And with my suggestion, Mr. President, if accepted by the sponsor, then we can have a clean copy where we can better understand the amendments being introduced. Just for expediency, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I'm not going to be unreasonable. As the gentleman says, we are short on time, and I hope that he means it.
No. Well,
because
Mr. President.
because all of us right now, Mr. President, and I'm just that's a flippant remark, and I hope I will be forgiven for that. Simply because we've all been waiting here, and we're trying to get the bills across, and of course, we all have our other duties, and I just want to make sure that we get this done. So I will follow with the suggestion and have a clean copy tomorrow. I thought I had submitted this to the committee secretary, the Senate Secretariat, and if that has not been the case, if they have not reproduced it, in order to save time, we will do it.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
for the sake of expediency, with the permission of the chamber, I move to submit the proposed amendments of the distinguished gentleman, the sponsor, to the body and deemed read. It is indeed very lengthy. So if that is acceptable, then tomorrow we have a clean copy of the full bill already.
Yes, Mr. President,
Instead
but
of-
we must manifest at this point that we cannot study, the hour is already late. There are a number of bills that are being calendared tomorrow. To be candid, we have no more time to study all of these provisions that are being suggested to us. So we will agree with the proposal of the good majority leader, but please do not compel us to comment and raise objections on this by tomorrow.
Majority Leader.
Huwag niyo muna i-calendar sa bukas.
Ha?
Huwag niyo i-calendar bukas. Then we go through each page here.
Session is suspended for a minute.
answering you. I did not even say that. It was Ralph.
Tapos na to?
That's it? Oh, yun na yun. Sige, tanggapin natin.
Isasabihin ko for the record.
Kasi pwede naman mag-interpolate sa
Senator Green.
Yun ang Monday. Sabihin ko na, ilalagay ko on record.
Session is resumed.
Thank you. Mr. President,
Just for the record, and for the benefit of my staff, in fairness to them, this was submitted to all the senators and the secretariat. And the deal is to try and make an amendment by substitution so that we can facilitate this. But I am not going to be unreasonable. I'm willing to do this, and if we can take it up tomorrow, on Monday, I hope we can take it up so we can finish it. I just want to make it a record that every day there are people being killed by motorcycle riding gunmen in this country. And this is something that I find very abhorrent, and that's why I have that deep sense of urgency. I would not want anybody to get shot here and they get away because we could not identify the motorcycle involved. And that's my statement.
thank you. We concur, Mr. President, and that is the reason we will try to facilitate things. Therefore, my motion is, with the permission of the chamber, I move that the proposed amendments of the committee be deemed read into the records, and a clean copy be distributed first thing tomorrow morning with the members of the Senate, and then we will take up the period of individual amendments at the latest Monday. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1397.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, May 24, 2017.
Motion is, session is adjourned till tomorrow, 3 p.m.